Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Corey Moore. Today we have Sterling Sessions with us. Sterling is a good friend and tons of ball of energy, which I love about him. Fantastic dad, an entrepreneur at heart. Sterling, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, guys, it's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Sterling, tell us a little bit about your background, maybe where you grew up, your profession, and a little bit about your family makeup.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Utah. My dad was a successful real estate developer. Grew up in kind of somewhat idyllic household. Had a great upbringing. My dad was very, very strict. He taught us a lot of really good lessons, and my brothers and I are all fairly successful. But we spent time kind of all over the place. Grew up and served a mission for the Mormon Church. And then spent some time kind of traveling around the country with my family. Spent some time living in Seattle, and then kind of settled in Denver. And I've been in Denver for the past 15 years or so. Right now, I split my time between Salt Lake City and Denver, and I spend a lot of time working on businesses and trying to develop products for myself and businesses for myself and for others as well.
Sterling, will you tell us a little bit about your family, your kids, and some of the background that you have as a father yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I think I have probably a little bit of a unique situation and a little bit of a unique scenario. I was married for, very happily for 17 years. I got divorced about 2.5 years ago. My ex-wife and I, we spent a lot of time. We were best friends for a really long time. Kind of a unique marriage and a unique situation. And we spent a lot of our time thinking about different ways that we could affect the world around us. When we were very first married, we didn't have a lot of money, and but we had a lot of time. And so we kind of decided that we were going to go in and do whatever little we could to try and, change people's lives and the lives of people around us. And we spent a lot of time kind of trying to develop that out. I think a lot of times we think, well, when I have a lot of money, I'll be able to do this and I'll be able to change the world this way and that way. And we kind of talked about it, thought that we don't have a lot of money, but there's still things that we can do to try and change the world for the better. One of the things that my dad taught me growing up, one of the things that he kind of hammered into us was the fact that, his boys would be net contributors to the world, that we would give more than we took from the world. And that was kind of his mantra and the way that he kind of raised us. And so that's kind of how I've tried to live my life. And I've tried to kind of expand things out for my kids is, even though you don't have a lot of money at times, there's still ways that you can kind of affect the world and change the world for the better. And so my ex-wife and I spent a lot of time, on that, working on that, and how we could do that. We set up a little nonprofit where we helped fund in vitro for people. When we were very first married, or when we were dating, my ex-wife had Crohn's disease, and I found out that she got really, really sick when we were dating. She spent a lot of time in the hospital. She was there for about a month. She racked up a couple $100,000 in hospital bills. And at the time I was a young broke student at BYU, and we had just started dating, and it ended up that we got married, and I inherited those hospital bills. So we spent a lot of time working together to try and, figure that out. I had dropped out of school, and I was spending, I was working 4 jobs, doing everything I could, 80, 90 hours a week to try and pay those hospital bills off. So we ended up, again, being broke, we tried to figure out some ways that we could kind of help and, affect the world around us. And one of the things that we decided was, as we built our family, we would do it through adoption and foster care. And so we spent a lot of time doing that. We did 3, cycles of in vitro, and ended up, all 3 of those cycles, failing. We ended up adopting, our oldest, who we hadn't planned on this, but she had some fairly, heavy special needs. She has something called 22q11 deletion syndrome, which is more commonly known as DiGeorge. And it can have some fairly major, major issues. She had open heart surgery when she was 6 days old. She's since had, several surgeries and has had her spine fused. But she's just a special kid, just an amazing little girl, and just a special human being. And then we, kind of got ready to adopt again because we had such an amazing experience with that. And we ended up being guided and directed by a higher power to actually trying in vitro one more time. Kind of win, lose, or draw. We decided we'd go in and try it, and whatever happened, happened. And we always have adoption to fall back on. And so we ended up trying it again, and miracle of miracles, on the 4th attempt, we ended up conceiving and having my son, who is now 11. His name's Finn. Great kid as well. And then we kind of got ready to do another cycle of in vitro, and we ended up, kind of again being guided and directed to, by what we consider to be a higher power to try and adopt again. And we decided to adopt through the foster care system this time. And we ended up adopting a little girl who happened to have even worse special needs than my first daughter, or, more intense special needs than my first daughter. She was abandoned at Children's Hospital when she was about 2 months old. She had a really rare lung disease, and she had super premature lungs. So she ended up being trach and ventilator dependent for the first 4 years of her life. She was fed through a tube in her stomach for the first 5 years of her life. She died probably 4 dozen times at our house, where my ex-wife and I would do CPR on her to save her life. Since we weren't actually her adopted parents at the time, by law, we were required to call paramedics every time she had a breathing event. So we would call the paramedics and we would tell them to stand in the corner, and they would just stand there with kind of shocked looks on their faces while we worked on her and brought her back and worked on her equipment and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a harrowing experience. Looking back on it, it's hard to believe some of the things that we did, but when you're trained, on that, your training just kind of kicks in, and, we didn't even think about it. We would just jump in, save her life. And then after, we kind of look at each other and be like, wow, that was an intense experience kind of thing. But it got to the point to where it was kind of commonplace towards the end. She would go into, full on, breathing distress. Her eyes would roll back. She'd turn purple, and we would calmly just work on her and bring her back. And we knew that we, had the skills and, the experience to be able to do that. So, it's kind of, I don't know. It's an interesting experience to look back on and look at it in hindsight and look at some of the things that we did. But, and it seems unbelievable at times to me, but it was an amazing experience, and it bonded us to that little girl fairly quickly.
So that had to teach you a lot. You're going through a ton early in your marriage and early as a father. What did adopting and having kids who had some of these different frailties or different issues that they were going through, what did that teach you as a father? Like, what did you learn from that?
There's a lot, those experiences, bond you to a child, first and foremost. One of the things that I struggled with at first when my ex-wife brought up adoption is could I love someone else's child? And there's all these sorts of superficial thoughts that run through your mind. But when, we adopted Lily, my oldest daughter, and, I showed up at the hospital and to meet her for the first time. And it was interesting because we got a call from the birth parents, who the birth father was 16 at the time and the birth mother was 18. And I was at work, and the birth father called me and said, hey, I know we were planning on giving her to you guys tomorrow, but can we give her to you guys today? And I think they were worried about hospital bills and, getting kind of buried under some of that kind of stuff. And we said, yeah, of course. But in the state of Utah, drugs have to be out of the mother's system for 24 hours before they can sign away birth rights. And so we went into the hospital and sat with them for 12 hours in stunned silence, not knowing, if Lily was alive or dead or what was going on with her. She'd been rushed up to Children's Hospital, and all the birth father was able to say is, hey, something's wrong with her heart. We don't know what it is, but they took her up to Children's Hospital. And what else would a 16-year-old kid say? He just didn't know. As a side note, we've kept a fairly strong relationship with them. He's a really great dad, a really great father. And every Father's Day, I get a really nice, note from he and his current wife, essentially thanking me for, what we've done for Lily and, being, the best father that, they could have picked for Lily and all that kind of stuff, which has been really nice to have kind of that connection with them. But once they were at the second they were able to sign away, birth rights, we, had them sign the papers. We ran up to Children's Hospital, and we got there. We talked to the intake people, ended up walking up and, saw our little girl for the first time. And she was covered in wires and tubes, and you could barely see her little body, to the point to where my ex-wife couldn't take it. She ran out crying, kind of thing. It was fairly overwhelming to see this little girl. They couldn't find a doctor. It was right around Christmas. They couldn't find a doctor to operate on her. And so they had to keep her alive with a hormone that 10 years before didn't exist. Had she had this problem 10 years before, she would have been dead within hours, kind of thing. But, it was a miracle. And she was kept alive, for 6 days. They did open heart surgery on her, and it was amazing because they cut her little chest open, and they sewed, after they did the surgery, they kept it open for about 5 days afterwards. And they sewed this little mesh liner in there, and they would stack antiseptic gauze on there. And I loved, one of my favorite things to do was to change that gauze out, because I could see her little heart in there beating and her lungs moving up and down. And it was just kind of this, it was this kind of spiritual moment for me where it kind of hit home that there is a higher power, and that this higher power had saved this little girl for a purpose, kind of thing. And it was just kind of awe-inspiring to me, and kind of helped me to bond with this little girl, but it was one of those experiences. And probably one of the biggest experiences I took from that was on Christmas Eve. My ex-wife and I, we were up at the hospital on Christmas Eve. We were there, and we had just started this new little family, and this little girl was just covered in tubes, and we couldn't hold her, and we could barely touch her. And they had her, so she didn't tear the tubes off. They actually had her sedated, and so she couldn't move very well. It was really, really difficult, to be there on, on Christmas Eve, and to spend our first, Christmas Eve as a family kind of at the hospital. And I remember there was a family from Salt Lake who came, and they provided kind of little Christmas gifts and a dinner for all of the families that were in the the neonatal intensive care unit. And it was amazing to walk out and to be kind of in this just weak moment, in this weak spot, and to see the goodness of this family that had come in and given up their Christmas Eve. And they had a couple daughters and a couple sons, and the mom and dad were there. And they provided this meal and kind of this moment of respite for us in kind of the middle of this tempest and this storm. And it kind of colored my vision of who I wanted to be, as a, as a man, and and as a father. And it helped, direct and to guide me. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've looked back on that moment, either in a moment of weakness, or, when I was feeling like, I was throwing a spiritual temper tantrum, like, kind of a why me moment. And I've looked back at these people and the sacrifice that they gave to kind of this young upstart family, on a, in a moment of weakness. And it's given me strength in the past, as a father, and, and it's kind of colored who I want to be as a father, and the lessons that I want to, carry through and teach my kids.
Wow, what an incredible story. That's you've been through a lot with your kids, and so I'm guessing by the language that you've used that life looks a little bit different now through divorce. You've obviously probably had to have a few adjustments to lifestyle that you probably weren't expecting. Can you tell us some of the things that you've learned through divorce, things that you do differently, or things that you learned that helped through that process?
Yeah, I think that all of us kind of view life, through the lens of experience. And I don't think anybody thinks that, hey, I'm going to be 42 and, and a single dad and, out there, trying to build companies and, do all these different things. And at the same time, be a really involved, an active single dad. I was, very, very happily married. We actually, and this kind of goes back to, the fatherhood side of things. We actually had 3 little foster girls that we were fostering, on top of, our 2 special needs kids. And then, of course, my son in the middle. I was in Utah actually on a business trip, and my ex-wife called me and she said, hey, we sat on the board of a couple different adoption agencies and, worked very closely with these groups, as it was something that was very close to our hearts. And she called me and said, hey, I just got a call from one of the agencies. There's these 3 little girls. They're the kids of a cartel-linked drug dealer in Denver that was just busted. They're 2, 1, and 2 months old. And so it was, it was like, essentially kind of like Siamese triplets, kind of thing that we ended up getting. And she said, so they need a home. They're going to split them up if we don't take them, and they'll probably never see each other again. And I said, well, yeah, that's a lot. What do you think? And she said, oh, I already said yes. I'm telling you because I need you to come home. And I was like, okay. So I ended up booking a flight home early. I showed up, and the girls showed up, the very next morning. And it was like getting hit in the face with a shovel. I mean, it was intense. These little girls came with a lot of issues, and they ended up, they would be kind of drug around from like heroin den to meth lab, and they wouldn't feed them for a week. And then they would take them to McDonald's and just let them pig out. And so when they got to us, they didn't know when their next meal was coming. And so they wouldn't stop eating. They would eat until they threw up, and then they would just keep demanding food, and they just want to eat all day long because they just didn't know. It was kind of a feast or famine, type experience for them. And so we had these little girls for about a year, and we worked our tails off, and they turned from these just, kind of horribly abused, little girls. In fact, the middle one, whenever a man would walk into the room, she would just lose it. She would just start screaming and freaking out. And it took me about 9 months to actually earn her confidence, to the point to where, she would come and she would sit on my lap and she would spend time with me. And from that point on, I kind of became her favorite. But it took me a really long time to kind of build into that. They had seen violence. They had seen horrible, terrible things. And we took these little girls from being kind of these horribly, abused, kind of dysfunctional, little, sweet kids, to being these super well-behaved, just amazing little human beings. And after having them for about a year, we'd started the adoption process. And they ended up calling us and telling us that they were giving them back to the maternal grandmother, who, had a bunch of felonies, and it was just, they were going back into a rough situation again, and it was heartbreaking. I actually had to take them with my ex-wife and my 3 kids, and we dropped them off in a Del Taco parking lot to their maternal grandmother, who showed up in a van that had, different colored panels on every, on every panel of the van. And they were screaming for us, mom and dad, and trying to get back to us. And, and my kids were screaming inconsolably, and my ex-wife was, just inconsolable. And I blew off work that day, and we just went to, we went to Boondocks, and I just put $200 on each one of my kids, cards, and just let them play video games till their eyeballs fell out. And my ex-wife and I, we just sat there and talked, and I could tell that something had happened. We built back into the custody agreement that we would have 50-50 custody, and we've worked together to co-parent ever since. And they spend about half their time with their mom and about half their time with me, which has colored things from a standpoint of, I don't get to spend as much time with my kids as I used to get to spend with them. And so every moment has become precious to me with them. And it makes it so that I want to take advantage of every moment that I possibly can. And I try not to take any moments for granted. So we spend a lot more time, on experiences and doing things and adventuring and, hiking and fishing and camping and doing anything we can to continue to build that bond, that we have, and strengthen that on a daily basis.
At one time you told me, here's the thing I wish I would have done different as a husband. Like I would have done that. And I remember what it was, and I know you know what I'm talking about. So talk to us about what you would have done different there. Anyone would have been hard to go through everything you guys went through and kept it all together. And it's impressive that we're friends and still are, as I know, but talk to us about what you would have done different. Cause I think that's a good lesson for those listeners.
This wasn't a position that I ever expected myself to be in. I thought my marriage was bulletproof, and that we had kind of this amazing marriage, and we did, for many, many years. But looking back and kind of self-reflecting, there are a lot of things that I wish I would have changed. I considered myself to be a pretty dang good husband, but in life, I think we kind of just get into these rhythms, and we kind of just bop along, and you let things kind of fall into, just kind of complacency. And I feel like we were in survival mode for such a long time that it was really hard to kind of break out of that. And we kind of lost ourselves a little bit of, in that. But one of the things that I'd always kind of been taught as a man and as a gentleman was that when you come home from work, and your wife's having a hard time, you kind of take over. And my personality is that, if I get into a situation and I look at it and something's broken, I step in and I say, I can fix it. And I just take over. And that's one of the things that I would do. I would come home from work and I would say, hey, babe, run upstairs, grab a book. My ex-wife loved to read. She loved to read. And so I would say, run upstairs and grab a book, just lay down on the bed. Like I'll handle the kids, I'll try and make dinner. I'll, very poorly most of the time, I will, I'll get the kids ready for bed. I'll help them with homework. I'll do all that kind of stuff. And so I would come in and I would take over the situation. I feel like what I was doing though is I was taking away, her responsibility and the things that, that made her feel like she was adding to our family. I thought that, that I was giving her a break, but what I was doing by coming in and taking that stuff over is I was taking over her role. And it wasn't the right thing to do. I thought at the time that it was, but I look back, and again, hindsight's always 20/20. But I look back, and what I should have done as a husband is I should have come in and said, hey, listen, you're the CEO here. You tell me and direct me and help me help you, kind of thing. Like, help me take stuff off of your plate, but this is your domain. This is your realm. This is where, you rule. And, I'm I'm a subordinate here and you tell me what to do, kind of thing. And I should have been there to stand by her side and support her and to help her. But again, what I should have done is I should have stepped back and I should have started traveling less. And I should have been there for those things. I should have been the nanny. I should have been the house cleaner, alongside of her. And instead of us, kind of drifting apart, we should have used that as a moment to strengthen our marriage and to kind of come together. And looking back on it now, again, I thought I was doing the right thing, but hindsight's 2020, and I absolutely wasn't. So I should have stepped in and stepped up and been, and walked beside her, rather than trying to just take responsibilities and things away from her to give her a break, kind of thing. So
the lessons that you've learned through divorce and kind of sharing custody now have got to be pretty important to share as well. How have your kids adjusted to that? And what are you doing right now that you feel like it's working with your kids? How are you connecting with your kids right now?
Yeah, divorce rocked our world, both myself and my kids. It's been a really, really hard transition, and it's not the way that it's supposed to be. It's not an ideal situation in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes, divorce is necessary. And my kids have struggled. My daughter, came to me and asked me the other day. She said, "Hey, Dad, you and Mom got divorced. My aunt and uncle are getting divorced. Grandma's been divorced. Since I'm a part of that family, does that mean that I have to get divorced?" And so we had a conversation about that, and that divorce is absolutely a choice. I think people think a lot of times that you have two pathways. You're either in this happy, loving, beautiful marriage, or you're in this loveless marriage and you're heading towards divorce kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be that way. There's so much gray area in between, and there's so much room for improvement and for pulling together and for staying together. But I think that there's this misnomer out there that it's one or the other, when it's absolutely not. Divorce, and specifically when you promise and you make a covenant to somebody, that is, the most important thing. And that was the most important thing in my life. I identified as a father. I loved being married. That was my identity, is that I was a husband and I was a father, and, that I was good at it, kind of thing. And it was hard to kind of reconcile the fact that I thought I was good at it, but still my best wasn't good enough. And so kind of coming through that and trying to, figure that out, at first I felt like a failure as a husband and as a father and as a priesthood holder and all these different things. And it was really, really hard for me to reconcile that and to hold things together and to make sure that I was there for my kids in the capacity that I needed to be there for. But we figured out, kind of that sweet spot of where we can co-parent and where we can kind of, do what's best for the kids and, carry forward. I think one of the best things and one of the most important things on that side, for the kids and for their mental health is, not to disparage or to, talk down or to talk bad about their mom or her about me on the other side, is to make sure that, she's their mom and they love her. And it's very, very important to me that they love and respect her, and that they, that they have a very, very high opinion of her, and that, that I never disparage or talk down about her, for sure.
I think that's a very good lesson. Another question related. So let's say that you're talking to a parent who is a good person like you are, who says, "Hey, I want to do more. I want to," maybe they're going to be a foster parent, or maybe they've just adopted a child. What kind of advice would you give to those people listening that, you've been through this now? What kind of advice would you give those that are trying to do that, or that are early in the process of that?
Well, there's a couple of different schools of thought on that. And when you foster specifically, you have two choices. You can either, that child or those children either become a part of your family, or you feel like you're babysitting a drug dealer's kids. So when we fostered, or, that was our thought, that those kids were part of our family. And the attitude you have to kind of go in with to protect your heart, because it's difficult, like having kids torn away from you. And it happened a couple other times to us where we got down the road of, there was another little boy, his name was Ernie, that we, tried to foster and adopt as well. Horrible. Just a sad situation, but he was burned horribly in a bathtub accident. And it burned him so bad that they had to amputate his fingers and his toes. And the first time we went to the hospital to see Ernie, he had on this compression garment, and we were with his physical therapist, and she took the compression garment off because the burns were so bad that they'd burned through his sebaceous glands and his sweat glands, and he couldn't sweat and his skin couldn't produce oil anymore. And so he had to have this stuff rubbed all over his skin all the time on this kind of elephant skin looking, scars. And when they took his compression garment off for the first time, I mean, it was grotesque. I mean, I got actually physically sick to my stomach, kind of thing. It was that bad. And it took probably about a week to where I got comfortable with him to the point to where, I could do that and not have kind of that sick feeling in my stomach. But he had nobody. His mom had left him with a babysitter, for a couple hours and then never came back. The babysitter had a bunch of other kids, ended up burning him horribly in the bathtub. Kid had just been in the hospital by himself for 6 months. And so we spent about 7 months at the hospital, every day with him, and he just wanted to be out. He'd spent so much time in a hospital room. He just wanted to walk, but he didn't have any balance because they'd amputated his toes. And so he'd hold on to your fingers kind of with his little nubs, of his fingers. And I would just walk him around the hospital floor for hours. And he would get, his feet would start to bleed. I mean, if I tried to pick him up and take him back to his room, he would sob and he would cry because he wanted to be out and he wanted to see the world kind of thing. And so we did that for about 7 months with him, and we didn't end up getting to adopt him. It tears your heart out when that happens. And so you have to make a decision from a foster care standpoint that you're going to be a port in the storm for these kids, that it's okay if they go back. And even if they don't remember you, like the 3 little girls that we have, and this probably breaks my heart worse than anything, and I get a little bit emotional about it, but those little girls probably aren't going to remember me. But for better or for worse, we were a port in the storm, and we were a place where they could feel loved and where they could feel, safe and where they could feel stable, even if it was just for a time, that we were at least that for them, kind of thing. And it breaks my heart to think that these little girls that called me dad and, I would go and sing to and say prayers with every night, aren't going to remember me, type of thing. But it's definitely something that you have to protect your heart with a little bit. But you have to, at the same time, those kids have to become your kids. I mean, any kid that we brought into our home, they got the exact same Christmas as our kids, and they got the exact same birthdays. And everything, was just like they were a part of our family from day one. And you have to adopt that, or you just feel like you're babysitting a drug dealer's kids. And it becomes really, really hard, and you can get resentful, and, it's really, really hard to keep those kids. They have to enter your heart, but you have to have the attitude that, that someday these kids might go back, and it's okay. It's okay if they go back, because at least you were a little bit of a respite and a port in the storm for them for a while, and just this, chaotic life.
That's great advice. I want to ask you one more question. I'm going to kind of take it in a different direction a little bit. When you and I talked last about fatherhood and about your early marriage days, your father taught you a pretty big lesson as it relates to some of the debt that you guys were dealing with. And I think that's an important lesson, a hard one for some parents to give kind of some hard love. Talk to us about how your dad, what the lesson your dad taught you.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times as parents, we love our kids so much that we want to take any obstacle out of their way. We just want to pull hurdles out of their way because we want our kids to be happy. I feel like there is kind of a happy medium in there where you can definitely do some of that kind of stuff, and you can be there to love and support your kids, but taking away, difficult things that they should have to go through, in order to make them the people that they need to be, is a lot of times a disservice that we do to kids. Especially today, we have so much, and there's so much abundance out there right now that, with video games and with cell phones and all that kind of stuff, it's really, really hard to kind of strike that, kind of that happy medium. So when I first got married, and I had married into, a lot of hospital bills, I dropped out of BYU, and I was working, 4 or 5 jobs at a time, 80, 90 hours a week to try and pay off those hospital bills. My mom called me and she said, "Hey, son, I've been talking to your dad. I know you have, about $200,000 in hospital bills and debt. Like, why don't you come up to the house? Your dad's going to go ahead and he's going to pay that off for you." And I grew up in kind of an affluent household. We had a beautiful home. We had everything we could have ever wanted. It was a pretty idyllic upbringing. But so I drive up to my parents' house, and I'm living in this little tiny apartment, 1 bedroom, kind of apartment. I'm destitute broke. I've got bill collectors, kicking down my door. So I pull up to the house, and I have all my financial stuff, and I lay it out in front of my dad, and we look at it for about 45 minutes, and he goes, "Well, son, you're in trouble." I said, "Yeah, I'm in big trouble, Dad." And he was like, "Well, I've been thinking about it, and I actually called you up here because I was going to pay off your hospital bills. I was going to take care of all this debt for you." And he's like, "And make no mistake, with the stroke of a pen, I could take all of this off your shoulders." He's like, but son, I keep getting the distinct feeling that if I do that, I'll be taking away experiences that you need to go through in order to become the man that you need to be. And at the time I was like, no, write the check, just write me the check, kind of thing. But he didn't. And I look back on it now and I can't tell you how grateful I am to him for that. Like, it taught me to fight, and it taught me to, the value of $1, and it taught me to be able to, have 26 cents in my bank account, and not be getting paid for 10 days, kind of thing, and how to stretch $1. And I look back on it now, and I didn't take a dime from him. I didn't take a secondhand couch or a secondhand dresser or a mattress or anything. I fought my way through it, and it taught me lessons that I needed to learn to become the father and the man that I needed to be. And I've tried to now pass that on to my kids. Again, being in a fairly affluent household at this point, it's hard to teach your kids that lesson when, they have everything that they could ever want, type of thing. And I struggle with striking a balance on that side sometimes. But I take those moments, I call them blitzkrieg moments, moments in life where you have to bring the thunder down, and the kids have to, there has to be a memorable, kind of experience tied to something for a kid. And I try and take those moments anytime I possibly can to make sure that my kids are grateful for the things that they do have, but that they're still challenged, and that there's still difficult things that they have to go through and hurdles that they have to overcome.
Can you share any specific examples of things that you've done during those blitzkrieg moments to teach your kids some of these lessons that you find so important? Can you share any specific examples or stories about that?
My oldest daughter is she has 22q11. She struggles with things sometimes. She's a little bit different than the other girls. She's delayed behind them, and she started to notice that. She started to struggle with some of that kind of stuff. And so probably 4 or 5 times in the last, I don't know, maybe 6 months, she's come into my room sobbing because girls at church were mean to her, or girls at school, treated her differently, or whatever the case might be. And, I've had some opportunities and some moments to kind of sit down with her and talk to her about that, and the fact that, even though she's different, that there are so many beautiful, amazing things about her. And I've been able to spend a lot of time with her, kind of trying to instill in her kind of her, kind of her self-worth, and that different doesn't mean worse. Different means, better in many cases, in many instances. And so, a lot of times with that, I've been able to take, moments in time and be able to have some pretty impactful kind of emotional moments with her on that side as well. So, my youngest daughter, she is 100% Hispanic, and she has very, very dark skin. And we were walking out of Costco the other day, and it was kind of an interesting experience too. There was a lady that was taking our receipt that had very dark skin, and I could see my daughter looking up at her with kind of a confused look on her face. And so we walked out of Costco, and my daughter turns to me and she goes, "Dad, did you see how dark that lady's skin was?" And I said, "Yeah, sweetheart, I did. She had a beautiful brown skin just like you." And she looked up at me with kind of this offended look on her face, and she pointed at her arm and she goes, I don't have brown skin. I'm white. Look, I'm white." And she pointed at her arm. And, I had an opportunity to sit down with her on the curb at Costco and to talk to her about that, the fact that she had beautiful brown skin and beautiful brown eyes, and that, that she, even though she looked different than us, she was, still an amazing part of our family, kind of thing. And it was an interesting moment to be able to, look at the eyes of an innocent child and, have her start to reconcile some of that kind of stuff, and it was really kind of a, one of those moments that just kind of, it makes an impression on your heart, type of thing. And so, but it was amazing to see her start to kind of internalize that and notice that she was different, but that it was okay. The different didn't mean worse. In many cases, it means, it means just as good or better, kind of thing.
That's a cool story. Yeah. So now, your kids are getting a little bit older, and I'm sure you've had some time to reflect this last couple of years on what it means to be a father. What do you worry about now? What are your biggest worries as a father? Or what do you want to make sure that you instill in your kids?
I think the biggest thing, Corey, is, a lot of times there's a lot of importance put on, religious affiliation or belief. One of the things that I've really tried to instill in my kids is, and I'm an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's an important part of who I am and the values that I've grown up with and the things that it's taught me. But at the same time, I want to instill in my kids that religious affiliation doesn't make you a good person or a bad person. I want to instill in my kids that I don't care if you're Buddhist or if you're Catholic or if you are, Mormon or if you're anything else. That stuff doesn't matter. What matters is that you leave the world a better place than you found it. Again, that's one thing that my dad instilled in me from the time I was a kid and he did it in a lot more kind of gruff way than I did, or than I tried to with my kids. His was, my boys will be, a net positive to this world. And if they're not, you're going to get smacked upside the head, type of thing. But with my kids, I've tried to instill some things in there of, a little more, gentle attitude on that side of things that we are a net positive to the world no matter what. And that as long as you leave the world a better place, than you found it, that you've done enough, in this world. Another thing that I try and instill in my kids is no matter what they do in this life, there's nothing that they can ever do that will make me love them any less. I feel like a lot of times in life we have this idea that we have to qualify for love, that we have to, be perfect, and that we can't have any warts, and that if we have warts, that we're somehow not worthy of love, and so we build kind of these artificial personas that we're above the world, or that we are, or that we try and hide those warts, kind of thing. I want my kids to know that they're different, but that those warts sometimes, and those mistakes that they make should be worn as a little bit of a badge of honor. That those are lessons that they've learned and things that they've been taught, over life, and that those things, don't take away from my love for them, but those things actually add to the amount of love that I feel for them. So, and my son is, he's particularly, kind of susceptible to that. He's just kind of a sweet spirit and just an amazing kid. And it's funny because one of the things that I grew up as, and this is, kind of colored my vision of things, is I was always to be the best athlete in everything. And I grew up, I was an athletic kid. I played sports. If I wasn't, doing chores or homework, like I was at the park with my friends and we were playing baseball or basketball or football, constantly, because it was something that I was passionate about and I loved. And I always thought that I'd have that. And then I adopted my first daughter, Lily, and then I did in vitro to get Finn, and then I got Cora, and it turned out that none of them are athletes, which is okay. And at first with Finn in particular, I would go to his soccer games as a kid, and and I would start to feel myself getting frustrated and turning into kind of the expectations that my dad had, when I was a kid. And I kind of, for the first 2 soccer games, I was that dad. I was yelling at the ref, and I was yelling at him, and I was whistling and yelling for him to hustle and all that kind of stuff. And then I had kind of this epiphany moment where I thought, you know what? It doesn't matter. Like, none of that stuff matters. And trying to live vicariously through him for your failed and the fact that you didn't make it to the NBA or Major League Baseball, kind of thing. Like that's not going to cover for your old wounds, kind of thing. Whatever he loves, you just support him. And he is, an amazingly smart kid. And he, just has this wired brain. He has almost a photographic memory, and he's, great at chess, and he is great at golf, and he has all these, this different skill set. And so I've just decided that, what? I'm going to support his passions. Whatever he loves, I will support it no matter what, because his passions aren't my passions, and I can't put that on him.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic lesson. Sterling, I want to talk about your charitable efforts because I know that's close to your heart. Especially recently, you've been really fighting against cancer and you have a passion for that. Can you tell us a little bit about that passion and how does that influence you as a father?
Yeah, for sure. I've always felt a need to again, give more to the world than I took out of it. I remember actually at one point in time, I was getting fairly successful at my job. I was asleep while I was laying, in bed, on a sleepless night next to my ex-wife, and I kind of was struggling with the fact that we were kind of falling into kind of the keeping up with the Joneses mentality, and we were worried about trips and about what car we were driving and all that kind of stuff, and just stuff had kind of taken over our lives. And I remember getting up and moving to, walking to our guest room. I stopped and kissed my son on the forehead, and looked at him in the crib for a little while and kind of thought, like, what lessons do I want to teach him? And then I remember walking into my daughter's room and thinking the same thing. And I walked into our guest room and I remember kneeling down and praying. And I remember praying for for the ability to be able to make a difference in the world, that I didn't want to live an ordinary life, that I wanted to do something extraordinary to impact the world for the better. And it was a lesson to me that sometimes you have to be careful what you pray for, because very, very quickly I got hit in the face with several shovels, So I left the company I was with. I started my own firm. I ran, an almost, a deep 6-figure, savings account down to like $600, kind of thing. We ended up, fostering Cora, and then we ended up adopting her with all of her special needs. And, it just kind of snowballed from there. But, on that journey, Corey, you're right. I found a passion for, cancer, specifically. That came from a really good friend of mine who contracted leukemia. And I've watched him battle, and I didn't know much about it at the time, when he got it, specifically about bone marrow transplant. I remember getting a call from him that he had leukemia. He was very successful, was running an incredibly successful company. It was exploding all over the place. He was on the cover of Time magazine. I mean, all this kind of crazy stuff going on. But again, God doesn't care about that stuff, and God can take anything away in an instant, in a moment. And, the next thing you knew, he was on death's doorstep, battling, cancer. So he and I started talking, and we wanted to make a difference in things. And one of the things that we looked at was the bone marrow transplant registry. So, if you're a white male, you have a 70% chance of finding a match on the bone marrow transplant registry, mostly because the country of Germany, about 40% of them are on the transplant registry, but only 2% of the US population is actually on the bone marrow transplant registry. And a lot of it's an awareness thing. You think of a bone marrow transplant, you think of like Wolverine strapped to a table and like horrible pain and all sorts of crazy stuff, but it's not that anymore. Now they can give you 3 subcutaneous shots. They can stimulate your body to produce stem cells. They can pull your blood out, spin the stem cells out, put your blood back in, and you've saved somebody's life. But very, very few people know about that. And so we've started, a charity that's called 2 to 10. And what that is it's an awareness engine to try and get, the word out that it's okay to be on the bone marrow transplant registry. It's not painful. It's something that you can actually do to actually save a life. And cancer, a lot of times, you hear, oh, somebody got cancer, and you're like, oh, I can say a prayer for him. Like I can bake him a casserole, or I can blast some money off into this great big amalgamous sphere of cancer research and never see the needle move. But this is something that we can actually quantify. If we can boost, the total number of people on the bone marrow transplant in the United States from 2% to 10%, we can save about 5,000 lives a year, and half of those are kids under the age of 13. And so we're not asking for money. We're not asking for for any sort of resource. What we're asking for is for people to go and to actually sign up for the bone marrow transplant registry. It's very, very easy to do. You just go to bethematch.org. You order a kit. You swab your cheek. You send the kit back in, and you're on the registry. Your odds of getting called are very slim, but if you do get called, it's actually something that you can do to save somebody's life, which in cancer, that doesn't come along very often.
Appreciate you sharing that. That's a cool thing. I have to get on the registry now.
Yeah, it is, and it's not hard to do. So, but we're about to actually launch a campaign on that. We've got some celebrities on board and some other people. We're working with some lobbyists and the government to try and find some choke points where people can actually sign up easier to be on the registry, kind of like being a an organ donor with your driver's license and some of that kind of stuff. But we're about to launch a fairly large campaign. The whole COVID kind of took over and kind of delayed things a little bit. But as we come out of that, with all the division that's out there, we want to do something where people can come together, where an 18-year-old surfer kid from California can donate bone marrow and can save the life of a 65-year-old potato farmer from Idaho, kind of thing. So we want to be on the forefront of that and spread awareness on it and get the word out there.
Sterling, where can people go to find out more information about that?
Bethematch.org, currently is where you can go, and then we'll watch out when we drop the awareness campaign, people will know. It's going to be very, very similar to the Ice Bucket Challenge. Kind of the vibe we're going for is the Ice Bucket Challenge combined with the Lance Armstrong Live Strong stuff, combined with like the 1980s anti-smoking commercials, kind of thing. So it'll be a nationwide campaign when we drop it, but we're in the process of getting that set up and and ready to roll. We've got a bunch of celebrities on board. We've got a bunch of people that that want to make a difference, that want to help, and I think that everybody does. Everybody wants to help with something like this. We just want to, raise awareness and show people how they can actually do that. But right now, if you go to bethematch.org, you can order a kit. The kit, takes about a week to get to you. All you do is take out the swab your cheek, put it back in the kit, and mail it back off. It's postage paid. It doesn't cost you a dime, and you're, signed up for the registry at that point.
So Sterling, you have given us some stuff today. I think just painting the picture of what you've been through as a father, what you've been through as a husband, what you've been through as a foster and adoptive dad, has kind of painted a picture of this net positive ideal that you want to leave the world a better place than you found it. And so I think I have a pretty good idea of how you might answer this question based on how you've answered the questions today during the podcast. But we always ask our guests, what do they think it means to be a gentleman? Would you answer that question for us today?
Absolutely. If you look at, kind of the old school, I guess, kind of, image of a gentleman, you think of a guy with a top hat and a monocle and a cane, kind of thing. And you think of somebody who would take their coat off and lay it down in a puddle for somebody to walk over. So, I think that being a gentleman to me is somebody who puts the needs of others before themselves. Whether it is kind of the old school ideal of opening a door or, taking your petticoat and laying it down so that, so somebody can walk across it. I think that in today's society, we've lost sight of that. And we've lost sight of the fact that, people have kind of become objects to us. What value can you provide to me rather than, the other way around? I think that's the true test of a gentleman is when somebody's not looking, how do you treat others? Do others' needs, come before your own? And I think that, that's a true test of who a gentleman actually is.
Sterling, thank you so much for the time you spent with us today. It's been really insightful. Some things we haven't heard before. You're a great person, great gentleman. Thanks for your time today.
Well, I appreciate what you guys are doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Corey Moore.
We are very grateful for you joining us today. We love doing the podcast. We love putting it out there. And we also love connecting with the listeners. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you consume your social media, and send us a message during the week of something that you've done, something that maybe you've gotten out of the podcast that has blessed your life. We love doing this podcast. We hope you have a great week. Make it a good one.